Okay, 90A, five lines to the bottom of the page. Tonar Bonon, short time shahimis. You have a 90B, I'm sorry, 90B. You have a short time, a naive animal. Animal has gored before, and it kills a person. The hizik, and at the same time, it also causes damage. So, okay, so now the animal, obviously, because the animal is killed. And then there's the damage. So you basically kill the animal, and the owner is exempt from payments. Now, this part is relatively easy to understand, except at least partially to understand. Why? Because the payment of a short time comes from the animal itself. It's a megufe payments, right? If you don't have an animal, there is no payments. So now the question is, what should come first? Should you judge the animal first for the financial side, or first for the fact that the animal is a killing animal? So the Gemara says no, you judge it for killing, you kill the animal, and then the owner will be exempt from payments. However, if you have an animal that's already experienced, it's killed 3 times. The hizik and the damage done nice First, you judge the laws of finance, then you judge the laws of din nefashos. You kill the animal. Let's say in the scenario of a muad, first they judge the animal for death. Then you don't make the owner of the animal pay. So the Gemara says, why not? The payment of a muad is not related to the amount or the value of the animal. It has nothing to do with the animal. Shar muad pays me'aliyah. It doesn't pay megufa, meaning the payment of a tam is determined by the value of the aggressor animal. The payment of a muad is not. So who cares if the animal is killed? Why can't you still make the owner make financial payments? So Rava explained that Shechinol Rabbana de Beirav, the Yasi v'Kamri Hamani Reb Shimon Hatimani. This is the opinion of Reb Shimon Hatimani. Amar Ma Egref Miyuchet Shemosar LaEda Ula Alma Be'inon Umdina de Bedina. So this is Reb Shimon Hatimani we saw yesterday. Shimon Hatimani,
as usual, enthusiastic young East Coast gentleman, old West Coast guy. Page position, please.
Yeah. Just turned to 91A. Just turned to 91A. Okay. Shimon Hatimani we saw yesterday. Shimon Hatimani's opinion is that when you evaluate damages for Nezikin, you evaluate Nezikin damages. You have to evaluate the element, the vehicle, the item that was used to cause the damage. So if you remember from yesterday, we spoke about a stone. A guy threw a stone. You need to bring the stone to court. Right? Rabbi Kiva's counter argument, which again we saw yesterday, was what happens if the guy pushes him off from a building? You bring the building into court. Right? What happens if the building was knocked down? You have to rebuild it first. Okay, we'll explain soon. We'll bring an ox to court too. So yeah, the ox you would bring to court. The ox has to be brought to court anyway because you're going to kill the ox. Okay, so Shimon Hatimani says that means you have to evaluate how the incident occurred. Now, this is sort of a wider version of an existing concept. What's the existing concept? In a scenario of murder, killing, whether it's murder meaning man to man, or an animal that kills other animals, kills other men, you do need to evaluate how the death occurs. And the reason for this is, this is not very different than our modern court system. You have somebody that dies. Well, why did he die? There could be 18 different reasons why he dies. Which is the reason that killed him? So we want to determine that, he was otherwise healthy maybe when he was shot by somebody, and not that, he had an aneurysm and he died from, his aneurysm and the bullet never actually hit him. So basically for death, you need to do this evaluation. According to Shimon Hatimani, you need to evaluate for Nezikin as well. The opposing opinion argues that death, it's very important to understand exactly who killed him. And now, obviously, this is not only a logical reasoning, this is also a Torah requirement. You have to do this investigation. However, the other aspect of the reasoning is that for Nezikin, for damages, sometimes a relatively small, effect, action can have a dramatic impact in terms of damage. So for example, in order to kill, if you put a stone in the street and you kill somebody, well, you presume that the person was actually about to die, because a stone typically doesn't kill people. The Gemara says in order to kill people, you need to have a bar that's 10 tefachim deep. It's big. But it could be that a stone could cause severe damage that you wouldn't expect. So that's why it would not require an umdana. You don't need to determine the relationship between the substance, item, act that caused the damage to the resulting damage. Even though you do need to calculate that, you do need to evaluate that in case of death. Okay. But Kima the Gabar Dina Lektola. Okay, so now according to Shimon Atimani, you do need, or Shimon Atimani says that Nezikin does require an appraisal, an evaluation, just like death does. We'll see. Rabbi Kiva disagrees. Rabbi Kiva says it's only death, not Nezikin. We saw it yesterday as well. But Kima the Gabar Dina Lektola. Once the ruling of the court is that we kill the animal, we don't hang it around to evaluate and appraise if the damage is possible. One second. You won't analyze the second case. So you'll have the first case, which is you kill the animal. The answer is yes. So we don't hang it around. So therefore, we're going to kill the animal. We won't have a financial case. That's why in a case of muad, we should do the financial case first. So we could evaluate the animal. Once we evaluate the animal, determine the financial case, and make the owner pay, afterwards we go ahead and kill the animal for killing another person. And we argued, I know I feel tamer of Akiva. One second. Okay, so Rava responds to the students of Rav, and he says to them, "No, I feel tamer Rabbi Kiva." I would argue that this brayso could even be the opinion of Rabbi Kiva. Remember, Rabbi Kiva says we do not do an umdana, an appraisal for nezikin, for death, only for money. We only do it for death. A murderer, we evaluate whether the method of murder and action that actually took place justified the loss of life. Explains it. In case of Nezikin, we do not do this. So how do we explain the brayso? The owner ran away. So Gemara says, if he ran away, the problem is that if the owner runs away, the court case must be done in front of the owner. So if the owner's not here, how do you continue with the court case? So Gemara says, the couple stadi ubarach. The owner was present for the court case while the witness's testimony was received. Ubarach, and then afterwards he ran away. So Gemara says, "Saif mehechem shtalam." Okay, fine. So he ran away, but you can still pay for the animal. Miridia. You pay it from the animal. 1 second.
Where did the wide lines yet?
No. That's 7 lines down, 8 lines down. The first line is mehecha. Okay. So if he runs away, so you can't collect his assets now because you can't bring him to court. But you could collect the ox in question. So how do you collect it? You take the ox in question, you rent it out until the debt is paid, and then you bring it back to court and kill it. It's a murderous ox. So Mars tam nidanya din in moment inspiration of nishtalam iridia of a hadun nidanya din in foshas. So why don't you do the same thing with the tam? First, do the financial case. It was in this case you're stuck. You cannot take away his property because he disappeared. He vanished. So we have to. The only thing we have from him that we can collect is the animal itself. Well, let's do the same thing if the animal's naive. This is the first time it gores, right? And in its goring, it both killed somebody and it damaged somebody. Let's do the damage first. Rent out the animal until the damage is paid, and then afterwards kill the animal. The animal killed somebody.
Well, yes, but.
An animal that
okay,
kills
but
a person gets killed.
If the animal killed somebody and there's a suspicion of a risk, this might turn out to be a repetitive behavior, and now you want to put the animal back out to work again, well, what's to prevent it from rubbing out somebody else?
So I would say that first of all, in the case of a tom, it's not such a big deal. It's unusual. It's probably a one-time event.
Did it once, then now it's going to stay unusual.
No, you don't. You don't know until three times. But what I would propose though is that you're right in many ways, and probably the rental fee is going to be significantly discounted. Maybe the guy's going to want to carry a revolver when he works with the animal. Okay, whatever version. Okay, a bow and arrow, whatever it is. Okay, 1 second. So Amar Rav Mori Breder of Kahana Zaysameres Ridya Aliyah Demarahu. Okay, so very simple. The simple solution is as follows. When you pay for Tom, what does that mean? A Tom, a naive animal. You pay Megufay. What does that mean? The value of the animal at that time. The rental value of the animal is not the value of the animal. That is called Me'aliyah. That's no different than making the owner pay cash. You don't have a right to say, well, you know what? I don't want your animal. I want a year's worth of rental value from the animal. It's not an option by a Tom. And therefore, if the owner runs away, then you're left with basically the animal. You can collect the whole animal. The problem is the whole animal is being killed because it's a murderous animal. So you're basically left with nothing. You can't say, well, I'll rent the animal for a year before it's killed. It doesn't work that way because you don't have a right to collect the rental value of the animal. By Muad, you can do that. By Tom, you can't. Okay. Now we get to the core issue. Do we need to evaluate all the components of any act of damage or not? Mi amrina, do we say like Tola Huda Amdin and Bahachi Nishama? By murder, we have to evaluate that the action, the event, the method, explains the killing, the fact that the guy died. With some methods, your action does qualify as murder. In other methods, it doesn't. But for damages, koldahu, even the slightest amount of potential for damage can cause immense harm. Idilma, or do we say loishna? There's no difference, and they both require an evaluation. Toshma. So let's try to prove the point. Ma bar sheyesh b'kedei lahametz asarat fachem. I've called sheyesh b'kedei lahametz asarat fachem. Okay, a boar in order to kill needs to be 10 tefachim deep. Let's say it's less than 10 tefachim and an animal dies. Potter, you're exempt. Who's like by? But if the animal was damaged, chayav, you're liable. Ma'alav, what does that mean? Mimato l'mala kachoshev. Bavakamma Kamma. This is what the mission means to say. Mitefach va'ad asar tefachim leka nezikin. Misa leka nezikin eka. Okay, so what does this mean? Tefach, let's say, is 3 inches, maybe 4 inches. Right? So imagine you're walking down the street and you have a change in the sidewalk, a 3-inch change. It's like a small rock, maybe a pothole.
Like 15th on the sidewalk.
Yeah. 3 inches. You're right. You have the trees that lift up the sidewalk tiles, the sidewalk cement. 3 inches is not a whole lot. 3 inches qualifies as like maybe a potential tripping hazard in a rare occasion. That is a fairly minimal amount of damage. And yet, the implication of the Gemara is from 1 tefach, 3 inches, until 10 tefachim, 30 inches, it's all the same. Oh. That implies to me that what? We do not require an umdano. an evaluation. Because if you, an umdana, an appraisal. Because if we would have to appraise it, I don't know, you think 3 inches is going to be appraised for like a significant contribution to damage? No, it's not. But if you say we don't require an appraisal, that's with the understanding that occasionally it will happen that a 3-inch change is going to cause severe damage. So if we don't need an evaluation. Alma, so we see from here, Linazak and Koldo, even a tiny potential for damage can cause an immense amount of damage, and therefore you don't require an appraisal. We do not appraise damage. So Gemara says, no, not necessarily. One second. Yeah. The Brisa doesn't mean from 1 to 10. The Brisa means from 10 and less than 10. Bavakamma. Asara misa ikap. Chusam asara porta nizikin isa misa lega. In other words, we don't mean to say that from 1 until 10 is damage. What we mean to say is less than 10, there's potential for nizikin. How much less than 10? A tiny drop. Effectively meaning you need a serious bore, a serious pit to do damage. And having it could very well be that a bore of 3 inches, 1 tefach, maybe we would evaluate it and we would determine that, this is not a contribution to severe damage and you don't have to pay. And you do have to appraise Nizikin damage. So anything less than 10 does have the potential to do damage, and we'll appraise each scenario and see if the depth of the pit is sufficient to justify the severity of the damage. Next attempt. Toshma, he koal einai v'simu. So he whacks the guy on his eye and he blinds him. Al oznai on his ear v'chirshu and becomes deaf. Eved yaitz v'hen l'cheros, the slave goes out free. If you remember, we said a Eved Kanani leaves his master if he loses a organ, and losing it, like becoming deaf in an ear, is sufficient. Let's say instead of whacking him on his eye, it's keneged einai. So either this means that it's near his eye but not on his eye, or it means that the guy was next to the wall and he banged him right next to his eye on the wall. The guy was so scared he lost his eyesight. Keneged oznai, next to his ear. Ve'ena shemeh, but now he can't hear. Ein eved from the cheros, the slave does not leave his master. My time. What's the reason? Lav mishum to be in because you need to evaluate the damage. You need to make sure that the action of the master justified the loss of seeing or hearing. We see from here that there is an evaluation for damage. So Gemara says, "Loy, not necessarily. What's the difference between whacking him on his eye, or whacking him on the wall next to his eye, or his ear, or on the wall next to his ear?" He scared himself. Again, I'm not exactly sure technically how this works, but apparently, if you're imminently afraid that you might lose your eyesight, you could lose your eyesight. And the same is true of hearing. We learned, a guy frightens his friend, he scares him, so he's exempt from the laws of man, but he's liable for the laws of heaven. Okay, so what's an example? Potter. He blew a shofar in the guy's ear. So he made a very loud noise. It went right into the guy's ear, and he became deaf. Chayav. I'm sorry, Potter. He's exempt. So let's say he walks up to the guy, goes right to his ear and starts yelling. The guy becomes deaf from that. You're exempt from damages. It's only if you grab the guy, you put him in a straitjacket, tie him down, and then you go to his ear. So then he has no choice in the matter. He can't leave. He can't move over. Then you're liable. But if he could have moved over, it's sort of his fault for not moving away. Okay, so there's still no proof whether or not Nizik can require umdanis or not. Toshma, chamisha dvarim umdanaisai. Okay, give me a second. I think there's a little bit of a change here. Yes. Yes, there is. Okay. Okay. Toshma. Okay. One second. Yeah, no, we have right variation. Okay. Toshma. Chamish dvarim oimnim ma'aseh v'noisen lemiyad. So there's 5 payments for chayvel, right? Chayvel is battery, and for salt, five payments. The noisen lemiyad, you pay him immediately. Okay. Now, here's the question. Ripa v'sheves, achi yisraping. So you have a guy you have to pay him Ripa and Shevis. Ripa, again, is doctor bills. Shevis is the fact that he's cooped up in the hospital and can't do even basic labor. Like guarding a security shack. Not where we actually, the security guy is not the real security guy. He's just he just has a book where he checks everybody in and out. Or a front desk work, or watching cucumbers. Basic work. It doesn't require any physical activity. Okay, so Ripa b'sheves achi yisraping. Until he actually gets healed, until he walks free from the hospital. Once he's free from the hospital, then he can do his cucumber watching. I'm due. So they evaluated him. 1 second. Okay. So and then he had a sudden change in his condition, and he got much worse. You give him what he was evaluated. Amdu v'hivri. They evaluated him, and he became healthy. He had a very rapid recovery. Kol masha amdu. You give him kol masha amdu. You give him the full evaluation. So, for example, the guy was, let's say, an adult, and he broke a bone. So, a victim of an assault, he broke his arm. So, let's say for an adult, it could take, take doctor bills and months to get healed. And all of a sudden, a couple of weeks later, doctor looks at the X-rays and this, and he's doing very well. He can go back to playing basketball or whatever sport you play. And a very rapid recovery. So then we say that the evaluation wasn't wrong. It's just that God loves him, and God gave him a rapid recovery, right? If you recall, as we spoke about before, the rapid means is a commandment to go to a doctor. One's obligated to follow the laws of medicine, but at the same time, it's not the doctor that heals. Obviously, it's God that heals. Shema mina yesh omer l'nezaken. Okay, so you see from here that you clearly do have to evaluate the damage. Lememar, to evaluate gavra kamma liktzer mia maka kamma loy mixer loy 1 sec kamma loy mixer loy. 1 sec. Okay, so yesh omer l'nezaken. We do need to evaluate damages. Lemema, to evaluate gavra kamma liktzer mia maka kamma loy. How long it takes for him to get better and how long it doesn't. So Gemara says, "Loy mixer loy kami ba'ilon devadi amdinon." It's absolutely the case that with regard to the laws of rapi, paying the doctor bills, you do need to make it a full evaluation. There's no question about that. The question is not, do you have to evaluate how much damage you caused? Of course, you need to do that. Kikami ba'ilon lemeimer chefza. Not to evaluate the victim. The victim needs to be evaluated how long it's going to take for him to get better. But that's an independent question from evaluating the vehicle, the agent, the method of damage. Right? Does the action justify the resulting damage or not? That's the real question. So Gemara says, what's the story? Tashma, let's examine this. Shibna Timani Aimer, Ma Egraf Miyochet Shemosel Edul Edem, Av Kol Miyochet Shemosel Edul Edem, Shma Mina Yesh Aimer L'Nezaken, Shma Mina. This is a little cheap because the Gemara just like brought this 5 minutes ago, and we saw this yesterday as well. And now the Gemara is bringing it as the final conclusion, which is that the opinion of Shimon HaTimani is, yes, you do need to evaluate it. Just like when somebody kills somebody be'evan or be'egref, with a stone or with a fist, you have to evaluate. You look at the guy's fist and you see, could this guy have beat him up to the extent that they killed him? Is it possible that this stone would have killed him? And you look at the damage, you see if it makes sense. The same is true of Nezikin of damages. This is clear that Shimon HaTimani's opinion is that yesh ayman l'nezaken. We do evaluate the vehicle or the method that in which the damage took place. Amar Mar, let's go back to the original discussion. Amdu v'hivri. They evaluated him, he gets better. Noitzli kol mash amdu. You pay the full payment, the full hospital payment, even though he left the hospital a day later. Messiah the Rava, this supports the opinion of Rava. The Amar Rava haiman amdu l'kula yaimo. So the guy got into an accident or he was beaten up and they expected him to be in the hospital for a full day. And sure enough, halfway through the day, he signs the discharge papers, he's out. And not only that, he goes to work. Right? He's not just watching cucumbers, he's back to doing heavy work. He's working in the factory, something like that. Yavina de kula yemo. You still have to pay him a full day of lost labor and hospital stay. Min Shemai hu derachmila, God had compassion on him and healed him quickly. Rokak v'higi b'haroik v'hever. 1 second. Yeah. Okay. So the first half of the Mishnah, we dealt with embarrassing scenarios. One of those was spitting at somebody. So it's not quite as I would have thought it was. Amar Papa, loy shanu elaboy. You have to spit at him. Aval bebigdai, meaning literally his flesh. Aval bebigdai, but if you spit at his clothes, loy. It doesn't count. So Gemara says, v'nehevi hibayishabidvarim. Let it be the equivalent of embarrassing him with words. Just like you can embarrass somebody with words, you can embarrass somebody by spitting in their clothes too. So Gemara says, we see from here, there is no financial payment for embarrassing somebody with words. It's obviously severely prohibited.
Sticks and stones.
It is a significant prohibition, very severe.
Yeah.
However, it is the case that you remain financially exempt.
So there's basically no payment for libel.
So libel, I would say, is different. Yeah, Baishis can be embarrassing somebody for true things. Libel is a very different case. Libel goes into Mitzvah Shemra. I think that would be a little more complicated. I'm not 100% sure of the answer. I don't know, and I'd have to check it out. There are the Mitzvah Shemra is a good example of libel we would pay, but Mitzvah Shemra is a very unique scenario. I don't know what would be the case in the other scenarios. Hakol lefik fayday. Okay, so we had a few other examples of somebody was disrobed, a woman whose hair was uncovered in public. So the rabbi said a woman whose hair was uncovered in public, everything, it depends on the woman, Okay, and now Rabbi Kiva says even the poorest woman receives a 400 zuz payment. And there was a story, right? The woman we saw in the Mishnah yesterday pulled over shaitel or tichel, whatever it is, snood, whatever it might be.
She didn't uncover her,
Somebody else. So we had the story of Rabbi Kiva, right? Rabbi Kiva's story was that a guy uncovered a woman's hair in public. He made him pay 400 zuz. The guy was hanging around and waited for an opportunity where he could find witnesses to show that this woman sometimes does uncover her hair in public. And Rabbi Kiva said it doesn't make a difference. So here's the question. Ibolo, Tanakama l'kula kamar or l'chomer kamar? Was the first opinion coming to be lenient or stringent? Let's explain. L'kula kamar to be lenient. The eka ani deloy bar l'mishal kulahai. The 400 zuz number, in other words, if you uncover a woman's hair, you pay 400 zuz. Well, not every woman. Only if they're sort of, middle class. If they're really, really poor and impoverished, then you wouldn't pay as much. Idilma or maybe not, l'chomer kamar. The rabbis meant to say, well, 400 zuz, there are certain women you have to pay them even more than 400 zuz. If they're very wealthy and high status, more than 400 zuz. One second. Idilma l'chomer kamar. The ika asher de boy l'meitzav leitfei. that there are rich people you'd have to give more to. So Gemara says, Toshma. Midika Amar Mekiva Afilu Anim Shabi Yisrael Royanais and Elohim Ben Echayron. Because Rabbi Akiva says that even the poorest of Jews, you pay them as if they're you have to pay as if they're middle class, basically. Shem b'nei Avram Yitzchak Yaakov. Shema Mina Tanakama l'Kula Kamar. Shema Mina. Meaning Rabbi Akiva the Tanakama was clearly indicating that the poorest of people you would not pay the 400 zuz, and Rabbi Akiva says no. Even the poorest you also pay 400 zuz, and that was a story. That okay, and basically as a side point. They told him he has to pay 400 zuz, but they gave him time to pay the 400 zuz. They didn't tell him he has to pay it immediately. So the Gemara picks on that detail. When we have man, do we like sort of delay payment? He owes her the money. Let him pay immediately. We don't give you time to pay for chavola for battery. So the Gemara says, yeah, but no. If she actually got damaged, she has to go pay the doctor bills. She can't pay her living expenses. She can't earn as much money as before. So all those, the chasr reminder, there's a loss. Then you have to pay immediately. But for embarrassment, there's no financial loss. You do have to pay. The court is authorized to give the man some time to pay. They found her at the front of her house, when a barrel broke, she went ahead and uncovered her hair to take some of the oil. But Tanya Amar Rabbi Kiva says, Salalta b'mayim adirim v'alei secheres b'yadecha. A Bryce gives more detail. Rabbi Kiva told the guy that nice try, you went on a good fishing expedition in very deep waters, but the fish that you caught was broken pottery, basically useless. Okay, now let's go to the end of the Mishnah. There really should be like a 2 dots here or a dot. The Mishnah at the end talks about a person who damages himself. And even though he damages himself, if other people, self-mutilation, if other people damage him, they still have to pay. So the Gemara asks a fundamental question. Is a man allowed to wound himself? Rava says, it's not difficult. One cannot assault himself, commit battery against himself. You can't hurt yourself. However, bevaishis, to embarrass yourself, that is permitted. Gemara says, bevaishis who? The Mishnah is also referring to embarrassment. Potter. And 1 second. A person who wounds himself, even though he's not permitted to wound himself, he still is exempt from payment. If it's embarrassment, if the Mishnah is referring to embarrassment, why is it that he's exempt from payment? I'm sorry, why is it that he's not allowed to embarrass himself? So Gemara says, this is what we mean to say. Not just embarrassment, the person is allowed to embarrass himself. Even wounding himself where he's not allowed to. If he does wound himself, he's exempt, but other people that wound him are liable. Okay, so the Mishnah sort of is covering both bases. If you embarrassing yourself is permitted, it still is the case that if other people embarrass you, they would still have to pay. Chavola is not permitted, and even though you are wounding yourself against the law, against halacha, you would, if other people wounded you, they would still be liable. So Gemara says, is a person not allowed to wound himself. We learned, if a person promises to wound himself and he doesn't, I would think he'd be exempt. To do bad to himself or to do good. And one of the examples of things he has permission to do is to wound himself. So therefore, if he promises to wound himself and he doesn't, he's violated his own promise. This is different, by the way, if somebody promises to wound somebody else. He's not allowed to wound somebody else. So therefore, he does not, the promise itself is fundamentally prohibited. It's a promise you can't keep. you don't actually keep the promise if you promise to wound somebody else. Together on that? So Amar Shmuel says, no, we're not talking about real wounds. We're talking about Be'esha B'tainis. He promises to sit and fast. So this is not a wound. He's not, gashing himself somewhere. He's just promising to undergo some process of suffering. Sigmar says, well, hold on. Gabi haras acherim lashiv B'tainis. Acherim mi'maisav B'tainisa. Well, let's say you promise to make the equivalent. The Gemara is talking about what you promise yourself and what you promise to do to others. So he promised to fast. Now, how does he promise to fast somebody else? You heard the problem. What? Okay, good. Very good. Very good. Okay. How can you force somebody else not to eat? Which in other words, which if I promise that I'm going to make you fast, then we would say, well, don't make him fast, and your oath is already invalidated. It's prohibited. Whereas if I say I'm going to fast, then I would have to fast. Okay, so Gemara says, yeah, it is possible. How do you do it? You had a good idea, but not exact. In the Mahadik Luba and Druna, you put him in a prison cell, right? Literally deprive him of food. Okay, so the Gemara says Vatanya, but another brisa says Ezehu Rosh Acherim. The other brisa gives a specific example. How do you do bad to somebody else? Akapleni, I'm gonna hit him. The Eftzas Moicha, I'll smash his brains. Right, it's before the days of bullets. Interesting. El Tanoihi. Okay, so Gemara says clearly, according to that brisa, what's the contrapositive of that? In other words, what's the equivalent scenario with regard to a man hitting another man, a man promising to hurt himself, meaning he's going to hit himself and smash his own brains, clearly indicating that one is permitted to hurt himself. Gemara says El Tanoihi, it's machlekes. It's a debate whether or not a person is permitted to strike himself. Who's the opinion that says it's prohibited? Let's say it's this author. The Tanya we learned. I will demand your blood for your soul. Rabbi Lozer if you kill yourself, I will still revenge your blood. If a guy commits suicide, Samar says, well, suicide, maybe killing yourself, that's more severe. But damaging yourself, in other words, killing yourself, a man will be penalized for killing himself. But maybe for damaging himself, he won't. Ela Haitana, it's this opinion. The Brisa says, Mekaran al Hames. One is allowed to rip his clothes over a dead body, and it is not from the ways of the Emori, the idol worshippers. Amr Belazar says, if the guy rips more than necessary, so we give him malchus for wasting. You follow the halacha, you rip what's necessary, but not too much. The kolshken gufay, and certainly his body. If you damage your body, you're also engaging in baltashkas, wasteless destruction. Gemara says no. The dilma begodim shiny. The pseida deloy hadru. Maybe clothes are different because that is a loss that sort of you can't heal from. But maybe if you wound yourself, there's some self-mutilation that could be healed. Maybe it would be permitted. Rav Yechon would call his clothes his honor. Rav Chizda kind of a maski beni hizmi. This is interesting. So the guy's walking between the thorns. So what does he figure? If he gets scratched, well, his foot will get better. But if he ruins his clothes, that's done. So what did he do? He would pick up his clothes. My body can heal. My clothes will get permanently ruined. Okay, next attempt. Elahai it's this author. The Tanya we learned. Amar Belazar Kfar, the Rebbe. Rabbi Belazar Kfar says, it will atone for him for that he sinned on a soul. This is referring to a nazir. A nazir brings a sacrifice of atonement, and the question is, well, what exactly is a nazir atoning for? What did he do to anybody? He didn't do anything to anybody. A nazir is your own personal vow of spiritual uplifting. Elo, what does it mean? He refused to drink wine. V'leidvorim kal v'chaymer. Umaza shlo yitzir atzmi elam and ayayin nikra chaytim. Tzar atzmi called over alachas kama v'kama. So if Rabbi Elazar says somebody who sins by refraining from drinking, the commitment not to drink is itself a sin, then certainly if a guy wounds himself, that's for sure sinful. If minor deprivation is considered sinful, certainly significant damage would also be called sinful. Yeah, let's continue. Somebody who cuts shoots. That's prohibited to cut fruit trees. Tony Rabbi Barchanik Hamed Derav, Shari Harakta, Nitiyase Katsatzta. A guy says, you killed my ox, you cut my shoots, my small trees. So the guy says, well, what do you mean? The guy says, what do you mean? You told me to kill your ox, you told me to cut your shoots. The Gemara says, Potter. The guy who did it is exempt. This Gemara says, what in the world? Every time a guy damages, the aggressor, the owner of the aggressor will tell the victim, you told me to. You told me to kill your animal. What's going on? It's Maya. So he says to him, what do you mean to say this price is inaccurate and I should delete it? He said, no, loy. No, you shouldn't delete it. There is relevance. What are we talking about? The Targamas Nisach, understand what the Brisa, Bishar Ha'imid Lahariga. You have an act that needs to be killed. Either, let's say, it needs to be put down for whatever reason, it's ill or something like that, or maybe it's a murderous animal, he wants to put it down. Or a tree that's supposed to be cut. So Gemara says, okay, what does it mean a tree that's supposed to be cut? It's a tree of idol worship. It's an Asherah. So it has to be cut down. So the Gemara says, so if it's going to tree, it's going to be cut down. What's the guy's counter argument? In other words, the owner says, why do you cut my tree? Because it's an idol worship tree. That's why, because it's supposed to be cut down anyway. So the Gemara says, I wanted to do the mitzvah of cutting down an Asherah tree. I wanted to do the mitzvah of putting down a murderous animal. And the general rule here is, and you basically stole my mitzvah opportunity. Somebody slaughters an animal, they cover the blood. It's not an animal's only it's a wild animal or a bird. The one who slaughters covers. There's a story of a person. Somebody slaughtered an animal, and his friend came along and covered the blood with dirt. Because he stole his friend's mitzvah, Gamliel made him pay 10 coins. Okay. Indeed. Have a great day.
We're mentioning the ordinance promise. The ordinance promise.
I get it.
Amen.
Nope.